Walking through the double doors onto the red-carpeted floor of Currigan Hall, I started to tear up a little bit. The room brimmed with late-afternoon Colorado sun pouring in through the windows above, but it was the sight before me that stopped me cold. A series of circumstances collided to bring me to this moment in late September. I was 21 years old, and this was my first beer festival. I hadn't planned on attending a beer event when I booked my trip to visit a friend in Denver, but she knew I was interested in what was then known as microbrews, and suggested we hit up a beer event that was happening downtown that night. So we walked up, bought tickets day of, and walked into the hall. Whether it was good fortune, serendipity, destiny, or whatever mystical predisposition you want to attach to it, the Great American Beer Festival was a defining moment in my personal craft beer journey. In the days before craft beer became omnipresent, the festival opened my eyes to hundreds of craft breweries I had never known even existed. I drank Hefeweizens from Texas, pale ales from California, and yes, brown ales from just about everybody else. It was a transformative moment for me. I was amazed that such a diversity of flavorful beer and a community of passionate brewers existed in this country. It was a party filled with people just happy to be there. And it was all held in downtown Denver, a city I would come to visit dozens of times in the years since. Denver holds a special place in my heart. I've watched as the local beer scene has grown and then exploded, with dozens and dozens of new breweries cropping up in parts of town that didn't even really exist, such as Rhino. Denver has long had a formidable beer scene, but today it is one of the country's best. And on this second episode of Beer Travelers, we're going to talk with two local experts, Tristan Chan of Porch Drinking and Jonathan Shikes of the Denver Post. These two are as knowledgeable as they come, and as we'll hear, they are full of advice for planning your visit to the Mile High City. Stay tuned at the end of the episode for my personal favorite suggestion for Denver. And here's a hint. It's the perfect place for a nightcap or to end your trip. In this episode of Beer Travelers, we discuss all that the city has to offer. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Why take a vacation when you can beercation instead? Explore the world one pint at a time and join Pub Culture Beercations for one of our upcoming group tours, like Going Dutch, Beer in the Netherlands, with award-winning Dutch beer and travel writer Tim Skelton. As the author of Beer in the Netherlands and Around Amsterdam in 80 Beers, join Tim April 29th through May 11th, 2023 for 11 beery nights as he explores the sights, history, culture, and beer of this often overlooked beercation destination. Visit pubculturebeercations.com for more information. All About Beer is back, and we're asking for your support to help provide the independent beer media this rich and colorful industry deserves. Visit our website, allaboutbeer.com, where we're frequently posting new content. And please consider throwing us a few bucks at patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We have low-cost memberships for individuals and small and large companies alike. Every dollar goes to help produce new articles and podcasts. So let's start our trip to Denver, Colorado, with Tristan Chan and Jonathan Shikes. So welcome to the second episode of the Beer Travelers podcast. And today I'm very excited that we get to go back to one of my favorite beer cities, and that is Denver, Colorado. I think arguably it's one of the world's great beer cities, and it's certainly at least once a year is the center of the beer universe, and it's about to be that again with the upcoming Great American Beer Festival. So I have two fantastic guests with me today, and I'll have them introduce themselves. We'll start with Tristan.
Hey there. My name is Tristan Chan. I'm the founder of porchdrinking.com. We're a national craft beer publication with writers all across the country. And we really love focusing on, tremendous stories from the craft beer industry.
And then we'll move on to Jonathan.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Shikes. I am the features editor at the Denver Post and the former longtime beer writer for Westward newspaper here in town. I'm also the author of a history book about Denver beer and the history of Mile High Brewing.
And the two of you are excellent sources to help guide us on our tours and our travels through Denver. But just to start off, Jonathan, you literally wrote the book on the subject. How would you characterize the Denver beer scene and how it has changed over time? For my background, The first beer festival I ever went to was the Great American Beer Festival. I just happened to be in town when it was going on, and a friend of mine I was visiting said, "Hey, there's some sort of beer event. You're into it. Let's go over there." And my mind was blown by, and that really started my craft beer experience. And then I went for about 20 years in a row. And in that time, I've seen Denver change from sort of a small beer scene to one that just exploded geographically and in styles. It's an amazing city. How would you characterize the scene and how much it's changed?
Interestingly, Denver was actually a pretty terrible beer town for a long time. We are right next to Golden, and Coors just dominated everything, bars and restaurants here for decades. And so craft beer got its foot in the door, but it was actually harder in Denver than it was in places, other Colorado towns like Fort Collins and Boulder, for the scene to develop. But we did have some old school breweries here for a long time, Wynkoop and Breckenridge and Great Divide and some others. And then things just exploded in starting in about 2010. The city of Denver got Strange Craft Beer Company, which was the first tap room only brewery that we had. Before that, it had been brew pubs and or packaging breweries. And since then, it's just taken off. There are, just in the city itself, there are 70, maybe 75 craft breweries here, from I think it was 8 or 9 in 2010. So, and bars here now, you have to have handles of craft on. That wasn't the case, or even close to it, for a long time.
The 2010, yeah, I would agree that 2010 is really when things changed, because it seemed like, I started coming to the GA, to Denver and the GABF, I hate to say it, but basically when I turned 21. So I'm not going to do the math on it, but we'll just say it was some time ago. But it wasn't for, a few years. Like you said, 2010, every year I'd come, there may be 1 or 2 new openings. You could go to those, you could go to your old favorites. But right around 2010, you started seeing 5 or 10 new breweries a year open up, and you try to make it to those new breweries, but you couldn't do it anymore. You couldn't actually visit the city and get to all of those. And that's when, Renegade and Crooked Stave and some of these others that I'm sure we'll discuss, it's just almost a loss for words for just how many places there are. But, how did the tap room model change, the Denver beer scene?
It changed it significantly. It just, people here didn't realize that you could sell a pint of beer over the counter in a tap room without serving food. The people understood the law to be that it didn't allow that. So when they figured that out, breweries, people who had wanted to open breweries, or people who didn't know they wanted to open breweries, all started jumping in, and they followed the lead of Strange Craft. And I think in 2011 there were 4 or 5 that opened, and since then it's created an entire culture around these breweries that is not just about the beer, but is about food trucks, that is about the neighborhoods where they are, that's about in some ways the activities that they have there, the kind of charities and nonprofits that they interact with and that they donate to. And there are so many different tap rooms now with different styles of beer, with different feels to them, that I think hopefully almost everyone can find a place where they can hang out and at their local tap room, their local brewery.
Tristan, you're not originally from the Denver area, and you, as you said, you're the founder of Porch Drinking, which is a great website that covers not just beer in Denver and Colorado, but further afield. And congratulations, by the way, on 10-year anniversary for that site, which is a heck of an achievement. When you moved to Denver, what was your impression of the beer scene?
Yeah, it's funny. I moved out here from Kentucky in 2009, so I was fortunate enough to be part of that big boom that Jonathan mentioned around 2010. When I moved out here, craft beer was still a bit of a novelty. And I remember when my friend who lived in Denver first kind of introduced me to Great Divide, we would belly up to that tiny little tap room in the ballpark neighborhood nearly every Friday. And so I think, to echo what Jonathan was saying, it was a shift from going to our neighborhood bar every week to going to our neighborhood tap room, brewery tap room every week. And so I think craft beer very much embodies the spirit that he was talking about, of becoming a community gathering place, for nonprofits, for, trivia nights, to, special tappings. We got to know our bartenders kind of like we knew our neighborhood bartenders, but it was more now so our beer tenders. And so, I think we've now seen that you don't necessarily need to be a large regional brewery to survive. In fact, in many cases, small neighborhood breweries are very much succeeding in their own right, because they've cultivated this tightly knit community with special programming and mug clubs and whatnot. And you really have a loyal base of people who really appreciate breweries for what they are, and whatever different and unique identities that they've cultivated.
And so for visitors to Denver, if you haven't been there before, how would you describe how the city is laid out? For me, it's kind of an interesting town. And for a long time, beer was maybe just in a particular area. You'll hear a lot of sort of acronyms or shortened versions like Lodo and Rhino and things like that. Tristan, how do you describe the city to folks in terms of how it's laid out?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you mentioned there is very much true. You have very distinctive neighborhoods, but even more so now, it's becoming a lot more homogenous. Obviously, Rhino is going to be probably the most notable neighborhood with, I believe, I don't know if this is still the case, but the most breweries per kind of capita in one neighborhood in a 1 mile radius. Within just a half-mile block, you can hit probably close to 10 or 12 breweries nowadays.
It's absolutely nuts. It's just it's crazy. Yeah, for a neighbor. And what was that neighborhood like 10 years ago?
Oh, it was sleepy. So, I was fortunate enough to work for Ratio Beer Works. And when they first opened, there was a fear that they had opened too far down Larimer Street in Rhino, that the owners were afraid that people wouldn't actually walk that far. Nowadays, you literally, walking through Rhino, it feels like you're in one of the densest party neighborhoods in the country. And so there are not only breweries, but also, all kinds of different bars. Right across from Ratio is one of the most prolific beer bars in the city. I saw just yesterday, they announced that they had Cantillon on tap, all sorts of rare beers tapping in addition to their incredible mezcal and bourbon selection. So, there really is something for everyone. And I think one of the things that makes the city of Denver, that makes the Denver beer scene so unique, is that instead of on the East and West Coast that are so well known for their IPAs, Denver in and of itself has transformed into this beer scene that is prolific in all sorts of different styles. You have some of the best barrel-aged stout producers in the world. You have some of the best lager producers, some of the best IPA producers, and some of the best sour and wild producers, all in one city. And so you really can find a little something for everyone.
Jonathan, you have covered this city beer-wise for quite some time, for multiple publications, and now at the Denver Post. What is your perspective in terms of its development and its geographic expansion too? Because as we've talked about, there was handfuls at one point, and I felt like at some point Sandlot, in the ballpark was about as far out as you could ever go. That felt like the end of the earth whenever you were there for GABF, and now the town has just exploded with beer, in all directions.
Yeah, it's nice to see breweries when they locate and tap rooms when they locate in neighborhoods where maybe there isn't that much of it going on, and even beer bars when they come in and there's not that much going on. Denver is almost unrecognizable in a lot of ways for me. I was born here. I spent most of my life here, and in the since I started writing about beer, and since I started at Westward in 2007, the changes that have happened, the development that's taken place, the changes in demographics, the number of people who live here has really taken off, and that's part of the reason why beer has taken off with it, and things have just evolved, quite a bit in terms of the neighborhoods where people want to spend time. The city now is so packed that it's in some ways, it's getting hard to live. It's getting hard to find housing here for a lot of people, and so they're moving to different places around the suburbs, and I think I think maybe the fun is going to follow them out there. I think that's the same thing may happen with tap rooms and restaurants who want to follow their customer base and who are also in some ways getting a little bit priced out of the city. But there's enough room on the outskirts, I think, for things to spread out and to make them all happy.
Jonathan, if there was, you mentioned sort of, how housing is just exploded, and it's almost a singular design. You see these very modern modular kind of housing, and the city is obviously always had a lot of transplants or attracted transplants who are interested in skiing or the mountains, but that seems to have just absolutely exploded in the last decade or so. I just know personally, dozens of people who have moved to Denver. And a lot of them, kind of like you said, Rhino and these particular areas attract a lot of folks. But what is one neighborhood that folks from out of town who are coming into Denver should visit that they might otherwise miss?
That's a good question. I mean, coming into town, Rhino and downtown are probably the first places that everyone goes. South Broadway is very much a locals scene. I think if you're coming into town and you're doing your research, you'll probably find out about it pretty quickly. But and South Broadway extends pretty far, but the number of bars and restaurants and clubs and breweries down there are plenty of fun to go to. There are other neighborhoods in town that are close to downtown. Five Points gets new attention all the time, which is a neighborhood just off. It's actually overlapping with Rhino, which is the River North Arts District. And those neighborhoods are spreading east. You can get from one side of the town to the other now. You can ride your bike and hit a couple breweries and or tap rooms along the way. Two of my favorites that are not in neighborhoods where you might have expected them are a brewery called Cohesion Beer, and that's it's just east of that 5 Points neighborhood. And there's a tap room called Ephemeral Tap Room that opened near our largest park, which is called City Park, and they serve 20 to 25 beers, all from one brewery. And they keep it there for a couple weeks, and then it turns over, and they go on to the next brewery. So that's a really interesting spot as well.
And Tristan, for you, what's a neighborhood that folks shouldn't sleep on that they might otherwise miss?
Yeah, I think in Denver itself, Tennyson Street is kind of a very unique part of the town. Hops and Pie is one of the iconic beer bars that still has survived over the past decade. Not only do they have an incredible draft list that features some of the best beer in the country and sometimes from out of the country, they also have an incredible pizza program. They just kind of transitioned and added a donut program that opens up in the mornings. But then along that street, you also have Call to Arms Brewing, which makes it a wide breadth of styles. You have Flight Co beer. You have the Emporium, and then just kind of nearby, you also have Gold Spot. So that area has really transformed in the past few years. And then I would also say, surrounding the city of Denver, worth kind of a short drive, just up the road to Lafayette and Longmont, you have an incredible breadth of breweries that are kind of technically within the Boulder County area. You have Avery, which is kind of an iconic brewery that has been around for so long. You have newer kind of a newer class of breweries in Liquid Mechanics, Cellar West, Four Noses, Westbound and Down just opened up an additional location over there. Primitive Beer, all of those are really transforming that Boulder County beer scene into something that's very formidable and worth the day trip up north.
We've talked a little bit on this podcast about kind of these icons, and Denver is one of those great towns that really does have these kind of iconic older brands that helped establish not just Denver beer, but beer in the U.S. Jonathan, what's your perspective on how some of these OG players like Wynkoop and Great Divide are kind of navigating the modern beer world?
Yeah, with varying degrees of success. I think that some of the older breweries, the word that they use and that other people use is relevancy, and whether they can continue to be relevant to what people want. Wynkoop Brewing Company, which was co-founded and co-owned by our mayor, then governor, then Senator John Hickenlooper. Was one of the originals. It opened in 1988 in a neighborhood where there was nothing but empty warehouses, and they're now in the middle of it. But they're not a place I don't think that gets highly recommended as a place to go to anymore as a brewery. They've still got a brewing program. They have a great brewer there. But they've tried a couple times to make some changes, but they've gone back to what has worked for them and what is sort of tried and true for them. So for them, that's they're still a brew pub that gets a lot of business, but they're not a place that's talked about, I don't think, by beer lovers. Great Divide is maybe a little bit of a different story. They opened in 1994, and they have done a good job more recently. They were very slow to change, and they suffered for it significantly in terms of sales. But Great Divides tried to push forward with a huge expansion that didn't work out for them. It really hurt them. But they had bought some land, and they managed to stay in business. They didn't have to go the route that some of the other OGs did, which was to sell themselves, like Breckenridge Brewery or Avery, and they were able to kind of rebound and refocus and focus on the kind of beers that people are interested in drinking now. And they've tried to remake themselves a couple of times, and I think they're succeeding in doing that. Breckenridge was also here. Breckenridge obviously sold to AB InBev, so they went that route. So there's been a lot of different things have happened to some of those OG folks.
And you can't really talk about Denver without talking about a couple of other icons. One of them, you really can't. You have to give space to a legacy place like Falling Rock. Falling Rock is one of these classic, if not the classic, American beer bar. It was at literally the center. If you could say Denver is the center of the beer universe for 1 week in late September, early October every year for the Great American Beer Festival, Falling Rock was that beating heart. And unfortunately, last year it closed. For Tristan, for those who never went, how would you describe Falling Rock to people and its role in the city and even the nation's beer culture?
Yeah, even dating back to when I was living in Kentucky, I still remember reading in Draft magazine about this iconic beer bar that really gathered, some of the best beer drinkers in the world, but also some of the best beers in the world. They had their iconic GABF countdown timer, so that every year you could track how many days and how many minutes were left until the Great American Beer Fest came back to the city. It was located right in the ballpark district. And so that that kind of geographic location was tremendous in its proximity to the convention center. Chris Black, the founder, was so thoughtful in bringing in incredible beers from all around the world at such an early time. And so I think its legacy was just like this incredible beer program, incredible location, and great programming for some of the bigger beer events that happened throughout the year. Now, sadly, it wasn't able to survive, I think, a number of different factors in the pandemic and also rising costs of rent. But luckily, it seems like Chris has been able to kind of keep that legacy alive a little bit by partnering up with the new brewery that just opened up out here in Mob Craft Beer. They're actually transitioning all of their previous programming during GABF week to Mob Craft. And so they're going to have several of the familiar week or nightly events that used to take place during GABF are now going to be happening at Mobcraft, which is in the Curtis Park neighborhood, just outside of Rhino. And so you'll have kind of a showcase of hop throwdown, which features some of the best hoppy beer producers in the country. You'll also have night featuring some of the more exotic beers in the world. And Chris Black has done a lot to try to keep that legacy alive. So I'm really excited to see how that transition works out. It is pretty sad. We've lost a number of different iconic beer bars, including Fresh Craft and Falling Rock, and but we're very fortunate in that there's just a massive beer scene and brewery scene that keeps the beating heart of the craft beer scene in Colorado very much alive.
And Jonathan, if you were going to write a eulogy for Falling Rock, basically, what would it be? What did that place mean to you? What did it mean to the city of Denver and its beer?
Yeah, Falling Rock was the first stop, and sometimes the last stop for people who come into town to drink beer. It was the bar that served beer when almost no one else was, that served craft beer when almost no one else was. It introduced people in Denver not just to breweries in their own state that they may not have known existed, from the New Belgiums and the Oscar Blues and Odell's in their early days, but to breweries around the country like Russian River and Fremont's and Firestone Walker that people may or may not have known about either. So without them, I don't know that Denver's beer culture and beer scene would have been the same as it is now. In the end, they were a little bit overwhelmed by a lot of things that were going on in their neighborhood, but also the beer scene was changing really quickly around them, and people's interests, the kinds of beers that people wanted to drink. Falling Rock didn't change as quickly or didn't want to as the beer scene around it. So you couldn't go to Falling Rock in the later days and find the New England style IPAs, the trendy, the smoothie sours, the things like that, because Chris wanted to stick with what he believed in. And so, a little of that, that was a little bit part of what washed away there.
I was going to chime in too. I think one of the more incredible elements to speak to how iconic that, Falling Rock was to the beer scene, when they announced that they were closing, it kind of became a pilgrimage of some of the who's who throughout the country of beer, celebrities who lined up and flew out and lined up for their closing weekend. You saw Vinny and Natalie from Russian River in line with Patrick Rue and your partner and John Hall. You saw some of the most iconic people that you knew from beer all flying out within a day's notice just to kind of show their support for what Chris had created over the years. So I thought that was pretty incredible, and it's probably unlikely that we'll ever see anything like that ever again in just how storied that beer bar was.
Yeah, I'm still kicking myself for not. I thought that John was kidding when he said he was going out there. He wasn't very clear about it. He was like, "Yeah, I'm going out to Falling Rock." I was like, "Oh, haha." but I had a couple of young kids at home, but I would have even probably, abandoned them on short notice had I thought that he was actually serious about it. And the next thing I know, I'm getting text photos of him with Vinny and Joe Stang and all these beer writers. And I did not get to go and say goodbye, and that will be something that will haunt me for a while. So, pouring one out for Falling Rock, and it'll be weird to be in Denver and walk by the space and not see it there. But as Tristan was saying, one of the things about Falling Rock was that it was the home for out of towners during GABF, and GABF is one of those. It is one of the largest beer events in the world. It is certainly singular in the United States. Jonathan, how has that fest developed over the years? And what is it, what is it like today? And eventually, what sort of approach do you recommend people take if they're coming in for GABF, and how to get, out of the most out of visiting Denver during that time, or also just trying to keep their wits about them at the event?
Right. It can be a challenge, and obviously it hasn't taken place for 3 years. So what people are interested in, what they're interested in drinking, what they're interested in doing, how they're interested in attending events, I think has changed a lot in those 3 years, in part because of the pandemic, and in part because of just the way that the way that craft beer itself has changed a little bit. So people coming into town right now, it'll be interesting to see where they meet, and where they want to go first. What will be their first stop? There are a few places where they might head. Hops and Pie that Tristan mentioned earlier on Tennyson Street is a favorite. It is not close to downtown, though, so you have to make your way over there. Bierstadt Lagerhaus has perhaps become the first stop for a lot of people when they come into town. It's big. There's a good chance you're going to find the owners hanging out there drinking a beer.
Yep.
There's a good chance during a big beer event in Denver like GABF that you're going to see other people there who you know and who you recognize. It's in River North. It's close to other breweries, and my feeling is that is going to be, for the most part, people's first stop when they come to town. But you're right. Falling Rock is gone. Fresh Craft is gone. Euclid Hall, which was a very popular place, is gone. So to attack Denver, you kind of have to. It's sort of similar to attacking the festival itself. You sort of have to know you got to do a little bit of research maybe before you go in. See what it is you're interested in. What beers you're interested in drinking. Maybe what neighborhood you're interested in going to. Try to focus on one or two particular things, because there are all the neighborhoods that we've talked about here. Just like when you walk into the festival, there are so many regions of the country, and so many different breweries, that you could try out. So deciding on maybe whether you want to see the newest breweries in Denver, or deciding if you want to try certain styles or certain vibes. That's how I would attack Denver. The festival itself is going to be smaller than it's been. They still haven't sold all their tickets, and I think people are, I think there's a little bit of fatigue when it comes to the Great American Beer Festival. It is huge. It can be difficult and overwhelming to be in, and it hasn't changed very much in years. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this year.
We'll be right back with more Beer Travelers after a message from our sponsors. Stop living vicariously through other people's social media posts and get out and make some memories of your own. Join Pub Culture Beercations for one of our upcoming tours and start exploring the world one pint at a time with us. Visit pubculturebeercations.com for more information. Want more beer for your ears? The new All About Beer podcast, hosted by M. Sauter and Don Tess, takes a deep, engaging dive into the hottest topics in beer. Do you need to know what the heck a cold IPA is? Check out the first episode wherever you get your pods. New episodes drop every other Thursday. And now, back to Beer Travelers. Tristan, your site, one of the things that it's known for is doing great fest guides and fest previews and what beers to try. How would you recommend folks tackle something like the GABF?
Yeah, when we first launched the website over 10 years ago, it really felt like GABF was the Super Bowl for craft beer.
Yeah.
And you know, when in that first year that we launched Porch Drinking, you know, I applied for a media credential, just thinking, you know, wouldn't it be cool for one day to be able to attend GABF as a press member? And you know, we were fortunate enough to, in that very first year, to be approved for a credential. So ever since then, we were like, you know what? They were kind enough to trust us to have this opportunity. So we're going to try to go as big as we possibly can in our coverage. And so back then, the BA didn't release their pour list for GABF until the week of the fest. And so we actually reached out to as many breweries as we possibly could to find out what they were pouring. I think by our 4th or 5th year, we were close to 70% in response rate. And with that information, we put together guided routes based on different styles. And it's a tradition that we continue to this day. So one of the things that I highly recommend is checking out Porch Drinking, because we'll put together guided routes for people who love seeking out the best lagers at the festival, or best barrel-aged stouts, or hoppy beers, historic beers. And so, you know, it's a great way to help you to navigate based on your style preferences. You know, the other thing that we also put a lot of emphasis on is showcasing some of the best external events that are happening around the city of Denver, or, you know, the Front Range of Colorado as a whole. You know, I think one of the cool things about GABF being such a spectacle that it is that it also unites the local craft beer scene to put on external events. You know, Denver Rare Beer Tasting is one of those iconic ones that has you know, has taken place in the week of GABF, bringing in, you know, very rare breweries that aren't typically available at GABF, and all supporting an incredible cause. And you know, Rick Like has put together an incredible program there, and we, you know, took inspiration from Denver Rare Beer Tasting and what Crooked Stave used to put on in their festival. And this year, we're actually hosting Porch Drinking's 10th anniversary beer fest the Wednesday prior to GABF. And so, you know, again, we're bringing in some really incredible breweries that aren't pouring at the festival. We're showcasing some of the incredible breweries here locally that, you know, are bringing some of their rarest beers that aren't going to be available at their festival, and sometimes aren't even available in their tasting rooms. So, you know, all of that is, once again, going to be benefiting an incredible cause in Youth on Record, but also the launch of Porch Drinking's mental health fund. So lots of cool stuff to take in all around GABF, and also outside the festival itself.
So I think we're going to move into a bit of what I guess I call a rapid fire or a lightning round. Just, you know, some quick questions, off the cuff answers, just sort of the first things that come to your mind. There's no right or no wrong. Both of you know the city so well. There may be some overlap, but feel free to, you know, offer some other ideas. But, you know, we'll start with, you know, Tristan here. You know, what are the top 3 local breweries for hopheads, for people who are looking either for haze or West Coast? You know, where would you direct them in town if they're coming to town for that?
Yeah, the first one that really comes to mind is Comrade. I know that's a favorite of Shikes's as well. They put together some of the best fresh hop beers. Their beers consistently win at GABF within the hop category. Similarly, Cannonball Creek, which is right outside of the city, they win for both lagers and hoppy beers. Trump Hands being a session IPA that is super iconic, and has won many awards as well. So I think those two. A newer one that comes to mind is Westbound and Down, which is located in Idaho Springs, but they just recently opened up a location in Lafayette, Colorado, called Westbound the Mill. And for those who are coming into town for GABF this year, they actually have a pop-up tap room right downtown in Milk Market. So you can try all sorts of unique westbound beers in that location. And they do all sorts of really cool collaborations with some of the best hoppy beer producers from around the country. I know they recently just released one with Pizza Port. So it's their Western Conference All-Stars, which features West Coast IPA producers in collaborations with Westbound and Down.
Jonathan, what would you suggest beyond that?
Beyond that, Cerebral Brewing is a favorite of mine. It's also the closest brewery to my house.
Nice.
They make some terrific beers there. If you are cruising around, New Image Brewing, which is in the Arvada suburbs, also does some terrific, primarily New England style IPAs. They are truly over the top with a lot of them, and they can be fun to drink. Heading out to Tristan mentioned Cannonball Creek. On the way out to Cannonball Creek, there's a little brewery called Coda, which I have a lot of fun with trying out their stuff. The guy behind Coda is a real innovative, creative brewer.
And Jonathan, we'll stick with you for this one. What are the top 3 breweries for lager?
I'm not going to start with Bierstadt because that's what everybody starts with.
I thought for sure that was where this was going to go. It was such a softball, but I love that you're going a different direction.
Going a different direction. I mean, clearly that's a first stop and an obvious one for a lot of folks. The brewery that people have been talking about, and Tristan can probably guess what I'm going to say next is Cohesion Brewing, which has only been open for about a year now, a little over a year, I think. And they do Czech style lagers with the Lucre faucets, and they do foamy Maliko pours, and it's just a fantastic spot that I have been to way too many times for drinking milk shots and other fun Czech style beers.
And for those who don't know, and this is I'm in Boston, so I go to Notch pretty frequently. There are some of the earlier ones getting under the Lucre faucet, and maybe the first one in the States, and with the different size pours. What is the milk shot?
So my understanding is that in the Czech Republic, there are 3 ways that you can order beer, and it is you can order beer with just a normal amount of foam. You can get beer with a half amount of foam, or you can get the entire stein full of foam. But if you don't want to do that at Cohesion, which tries to follow those Czech traditions really, really closely, you can just get a shot of foam, and they will pour it for you. And it is it's creamy, it's milky. You just take it down, and I've bought foam shots for the people I'm with whenever I go, because it's just a lot of fun, and they look at you a little weird, but
it's got to be a hell of a lot better than that. I don't know if you've had a Maliko pour, but it is essentially it's like a beer related like water torture. It is not a pleasant experience as you try to chug down all that massive amount. It's a fun experience, but wow, it leaves you feeling terrible. I think I like Denver's innovation on the Czech tradition with with the beer shot. That sounds a little more palatable.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. They're one of my favorite things to do. And a third spot for lagers, and maybe one that maybe people don't immediately think of lagers when they think of true brewing, but I do, because they're I just love the lagers that they're churning out there. That's the Heavy Metal Brewery on South Broadway. Mm-hmm. They do a lot of wild ales. They do some real great IPAs, but their lager program to me is one of my favorites in town.
And Tristan, where are you going for lager? Obviously, nobody wants to go to Bierstadt because everybody goes to Bierstadt. So we'll do, and I think we can talk about Bierstadt in a minute because it is its own experience. But what 3 places would you recommend? Yeah,
I mean, Bierstadt is first and foremost always number 1 for me. I think Shikes hit it on the head with Cohesion. They're one of my favorites, and really, for being just about a year old, it's crazy how quickly they've become one of the top producers in the area. Similarly, staying along the Czech style lager route, I think Wild Provisions, which is known also for wilds and sours, they're also dedicated to producing Czech style lagers, and they do a tremendous job in that style. We also have Zwei Brewing up in Fort Collins, which does an incredible job. Seed Stock here locally in Denver focuses on kind of traditional historic styles as a whole, which means that they do a tremendous job with their lagers. One kind of little bit of a sleeper is Fritz Family Brewers, which is also newer. They're just outside of the Boulder area, and similarly, Wibby Brewing out there does a tremendous job with lagers. And I think you're like kind of what Shikes mentioned in True Brewing. You're seeing a lot of just tremendous overall producers of a wide breadth of styles that have really focused in on lagers as of recently. New Image, in addition to kind of really innovative approaches towards hoppy beers. As you mentioned in the previous category, they produce some killer lagers nowadays. You're also seeing that, in a number of different ways here, in kind of, dedicated kind of wider breadth of producers that now do some incredible lagers in Cerebral and Weldworks, and I think people, and also Knotted Root as well. So you're really seeing brewers who love that crisp, clean style, love drinking that themselves. They're like, hey, well, if I love drinking it so much, even though I traditionally have focused in on other styles, I also want to produce lagers so that myself and the rest of my staff can enjoy it too.
Tristan is sitting here destroying the idea of a lightning round, but he's just basically naming every lager producer in the Denver area. But you know what? This is that kind of podcast. This is a safe zone for lager lovers, so I'll allow it. That works for me.
Oh, and also, I would be remiss not to mention Novel Strand. They're located in that Broadway neighborhood, and similarly, they do a tremendous job with hoppy beers, but they've really kind of come under the wing of Ashley over at Bierstadt and honed in on their lager program as well. So Novel Strand might be the biggest kind of under the radar brewery that I think, if people are coming into town, you should absolutely check out their brewery as a whole.
Jonathan, what's the one place people should go for sour or barrel aged beer?
Oh boy, that's a good question. We lost one of our best producers of sour beer here just recently.
Yeah.
At Black Project Wild and Spontaneous Sales. They made some amazing stuff. The grandfather of sour beers here in town is probably Crooked Stave. They do a lot fewer sours than they used to. Their clean beer program has taken off quite significantly recently. And I'm also destroying the concept of a lightning round because, part of it when I think about sour beers, traditional sour beers are being made less and less, and kind of tart beers are what people are calling sours now, and everybody makes those, or a lot of people do. But Crooked Stave and True make some terrific sour beers. For barrel aged beers, River North is might be my favorite spot in town, River North Brewery, not to be confused with the neighborhood. They do some huge clean barrel aged stouts and porters and barley wines that blow my mind all the time.
Tristan, where are you going for sour or tart beers? Jonathan said, and barrel beer.
Yeah, Wild Provisions up in Boulder is one of the sleeper ones for that style. Crooked Stave, obviously, as Jonathan mentioned before. And I think one sleeper in Denver that does a tremendous job, it's a smaller program, is Bayer Brewing out on Broadway. I think they do some really, really killer stuff and don't get as much love as they typically should. They're right down the street from True Brewing, which also is just so prolific in the style. So you could hit both of those up right in the Broadway neighborhood.
And this is a question I was actually it's a good transition here. Thank you, Tristan. Jonathan, what is one great place one great brewery that doesn't get enough attention or is flying under the radar?
Flying under the radar. The brewery that Tristan mentioned earlier, Novel Strand, it flies under the radar quite a bit. It's a pretty neat spot. There are some younger breweries that are having some fun, not just with their beer, but with community a little bit. And I think two of them that come to mind that are worth checking out are a new one called Wagwan, which has a Jamaican theme to it. They do some fun things with some tropical fruits and some other interesting flavors. And the other one is Raices, which which brings together Latino community, people with backgrounds from a wide variety of countries, into some terrific beers there. Head brewer there worked for Dry Dock for a really long time, and I think he turns out some beers quite very quietly, that are pretty good. And the spot itself across from Mile High Stadium where the Broncos play is just a really fun place to hang out as well.
Tristan, what place deserves a second look? A place that maybe has been open for a while, people maybe haven't been to, but is doing great things that people should take another shot at.
I think we have a little bit of a different perspective since we are local to Denver, so I think our perception might be a little changed. But for locals, to me, Crooked Stave is one that maybe has been around for a little while. People, I think, have shifted away from sour beers a little bit more. And so it might not come to mind because they were so known for so long as only producing sour beers. But their barrel-aged clean program is actually one of the most impressive that I've seen as of late, for barrel-aged stouts that are completely clean. They've also branched out into some hobby beers, some lagers. And so I think overall, they've kind of evolved the most out of the breweries that have been around for a little while.
Jonathan, and I'll just prepare you both. I'll ask you both this one. Are there any breweries that you think sort of need to step up their games or have been slacking? We're not always nice on this podcast.
Right.
Sometimes we ask some tougher questions, because that's the thing. If you're coming into town nowadays and you're trying to do research, it's really difficult to determine, what's a good place to go to and what's not. And this is the context for it. Whenever I'm traveling into a new city or a city I haven't been to in a while, and I go on Google Maps, every brewery has 4.8 or 4.9 stars. It's not even remotely helpful. So it's good to have experts who can say, these are not places that are necessarily bad or making bad beer, but just a place that, folks, maybe they just need to step it up, or they just haven't quite been getting it done. I know this doesn't always make friends, but try to buy you a little time there.
Right. Thanks for buying me time. And I'm going through in my head and trying to think of breweries that maybe have been more disappointing to me lately. And I'm actually having a hard time thinking. This is not a fair answer, probably, but because it's an easy target. But Oscar Blues, which is here, when they had every time they had a new release, it was a must buy for me. I had to try it. Everything that they did was so different. I know they've had a bunch of new releases recently, but I haven't paid attention. And it's not because the brewers have changed, and it's not because they were bought by Monster. I'm not sure, I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe, the things I have tried are just, they sort of fall into the middle of the pack these days. So that might be an easy way out of that question for me, but that's what I thought of.
That's fair. Tristan?
For me, it'd probably be Tivoli. The brand itself is one of the oldest in the state. And in reading Jonathan's book, it's incredible the history that they have brought to the city's craft beer scene, and being one of the oldest breweries in Colorado. I think as of late, most of the beers they put out, including, and I think the biggest example of this is their release of Outlaw, probably the most underwhelming lager that I've had as of late. And it's really unfortunate for such an iconic brand to go that route of putting out this light lager that really just doesn't have much complexity to it at all. So I think Tivoli is probably the one for me that I feel I could step it up a little bit more.
And then this is difficult in a different direction, but if there were only 3 places that you could go to, Tristan, 3 breweries in the city, what would those 3 be? What's the top 3 for Tristan?
Oh man, this one's
almost worse.
Yeah, it's like trying to choose your favorite child, right?
That's funny because people said that on the last podcast, and I can say, having two children, I definitely have a favorite. So I'm just saying it can be done. They don't listen to this podcast, so it'll be fine.
Oh, geez. I would definitely say Bierstadt Lagerhaus. I think that they're one of the breweries that every single beer that they release is absolutely incredibly done and nearly flawless. So I think Bierstadt is on the top of my list. From there, I would also say maybe Our Mutual Friend Brewing. That's one that we haven't really mentioned before, but
yeah, I was surprised that one hadn't come up yet. So I'm glad that you're talking about it.
yeah, they're one of the breweries that I also think has had the biggest evolution in terms of, I think their owners would admit that when they first launched, they released beers that wouldn't be able to survive in today's market. But they've elevated their game so incredibly over the last 5 years that they're now truly a top contender. And then, one that is kind of cheating in that you really can't get much of their beer. But in a lot of the festivals that are the ancillary festivals that are taking place around GABF, including ours and Denver Rare Beer Tasting, you'll be able to find them as Amalgam. It started by Phil Joyce, who's now also a brewer at Ratio Beer Works, but they focus in on an incredible barrel aged program, both sours and clean. But it's really a membership brewery primarily, and they also do occasional releases to the public, but their beer is some of the best in the entire state.
Jonathan, for you, top three?
Boy, that is a hard question. Maybe I can do it by the breweries that I go to the most, because those, maybe those are my top three. But to just stay with the theme, Cohesion is just a place where I can't quite stay away from. And Cerebral is another one that just just sort of wows me every time I go in there. They also have a foeder aged lager program that's really cool there. I mentioned River North already. Ratio, I think, has put itself into a position where it's just absolutely an essential place in town. They have two locations now, one in South Denver, one in Rhino. They continue to make many of the same stellar beers that they've made for a long time. You know what you're going to get. They're awesome. Their GABF medal count has risen here recently, as they continue to do a good job. And I'm looking forward to seeing if they are going to start on a small level with some innovation going forward with their new head brewer that Tristan just mentioned, Phil Joyce.
So there are two breweries that I want to we're getting close to the end here. I want to kind of close out with one that we've talked about and one that we haven't. So let's start with the one that we've talked about. I'm just interested in getting both of your perspectives on Bierstadt. And it's one that we've talked about around the edges a little bit here, but it has, as I think Tristan said, kind of become that central place, that place where when I came into town for the first time in a while, I'm heading there and I'm getting a slow pour Pils, which has kind of helped change the face of lager in this country, along with places like Notch and some others. Tristan, what is it about Bierstadt? Why is it so popular? Is it popular with locals as well? Is it just in the mind frame of those of us who are, beer writers from around the world and around the country, or brewers? What is it about the place?
Yeah, I think a number of different factors contribute to it. First and foremost, the beer industry loves drinking lagers. And I think, they did not skimp at all in how they built out that brewery. They flew in an actual German brew system, and their attention to detail in crafting, thoughtful, time-focused lagers that truly take a lot of time to produce. They don't skimp on any of the processes and double, triple decoction styles, double, triple decoction technique for their lagers. They really put in the time, the effort, the quality ingredients to really produce truly some of the best lagers in the world. In addition to that, the space and location play to their advantage as well. They're in one of the hottest brewery neighborhoods in the Rhino Art District, but also that space is massive, and they utilize it well.
They have like a full-scale wrestling ring in there. It's like I don't even understand what's going on in there.
Yeah, during kind of regular operating hours, they have like adult-sized cornhole. They have giant beer pong. So they have a lot of activities that engage, the just everyday drinker, not necessarily even beer drinkers, but people who just love to have a good time. And so, it reminds me a little bit of how Rheingeist developed out in Cincinnati. They had a massive warehouse space. I remember when they first opened, they were able to hold full-blown wiffle ball leagues in their tap room. And so very similarly, Bierstadt utilizes their space well. They have tremendous beers. They're located in a great neighborhood, and the style itself is very conducive to traditional beer drinkers.
Jonathan, what is it about Bierstadt? Why can't people seem to get enough?
Boy, they have a bullheaded dedication to what it is that they do, and they do. They like to do the same thing every time, and they're not pushing out a huge number of different beers. They're just dialing in, and maybe I guess they've already done that. I'm sure they would probably say that they're always working to dial it in, even further. One of the things about Bierstadt is the theater that goes on there as well. I mean, the slow pour pills. That's a little bit of theater. You have to wait for your beer. The way it looks is just spectacular. A giant pile of foam on top of this slender glass. You can see the bubbles rising. You can see right through it. Forcing the anticipation of having to wait for it. So, there's some of that goes with it. If you get a crowler to go of the Pilsner, it's not going to be the same experience as drinking it there. So I think that's another aspect of it that really lends to the experience of why people go there. I myself, I got married there. I had my wedding reception right after it opened. So, I'm a little biased in that sense as well.
That is great. One place that has not come up, and I'm not terribly surprised it hasn't come up, but I think it might make for hopefully a short but interesting discussion, is Sandlot. This is a brewery that I have, a kind of a long relationship with, dating back, quite some time, just in the sense that, this is the place for those that don't know, it's a small brewery, kind of a test brewery as part of, Coors, that is built right into the side of literally Coors Field. And it's a place where, they had, Blue Moon was developed and processed and eventually, and brewed for some period of time in terms of testing. But I think my relationship with them relates more to their lager program. And this is a place that has won a ton of GABF medals over the years, maybe less so in recent years. And I don't really know what the status of things is there now, but it's a place that I always thought flew very far under the radar, but the beer was always really good, especially on the lager side. What's your impressions of Sandlot and sort of where it stands today? I guess we can start with Jonathan.
Yeah, a fascinating place that was built in 1995 in an historic warehouse that they incorporated into the architecture of the park there. The guys who brewed there for the majority of its existence they were the same couple of guys, Tom and John Lignard.
Yep.
John moved over to the Sandlot is actually technically, it's called the Sandlot, but it's also Blue Moon Brewery, and he moved over to their other facility. But those guys, they work down in a basement underneath the brewery, and they turn out some fantastic lagers that aren't really available. You can go in and you can get them sometimes in the Sandlot during a game, but you can't find them in the rest of the stadium.
Right.
You can find their standards, the things that they put out, and they may have their right field red or some of the other beers that they turn out. But the really carefully crafted lagers that they do are really hard to get. They're really hard to get a hold of. people in the industry can go in there and get a tour, and you can even get I forget what they call it, the half and half, which is like a Bach and a Helles, I think, that they mix together, something like that, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, they won upwards of 45 medals over the years, and one of the reasons they haven't recently is just because Coors, which owns them, has to choose which breweries it's going to enter into the Great American Beer Festival now, and they don't always get picked. So otherwise, I think they would, continue to win awards for primarily their German style lagers and a few ales. But yeah, it's a very unusual, very special place in there.
Tristan, how about you? What's your relationship with and experience and opinion of Sandlot?
Yeah, I think Jonathan covered most of it, but prior to Coors Field's willingness to bring in other craft beers, that was kind of the one spot that you could go to truly enjoy some unique special craft beers during a baseball game. I know that now, since they've actually opened up a Blue Moon Rhino location, that tradition kind of continues on within a larger scale at their Rhino tap room for Blue Moon. And again, under the radar in the fact that people often overlook the fact that Blue Moon is, they think of Blue Moon as just this citrus wheat ale, but they are producing some truly incredible beers at that Rhino location as well.
Jonathan, Tristan, we have covered a lot of ground in just under an hour, actually. So we tried to stay under that. But this is great, and it really has. I've been taking a lot of notes. I'm definitely going back and listening to this before I come to town in a couple of weeks. And I'm just very excited to re-engage with this incredibly vibrant beer scene that both of you have contributed so much to, with your words and your writing. Where can people find you both online, Jonathan, and your work?
I am now, after many, many years at Westward, I am at denverpost.com, which is where my beer stories are. I share that beat now with a colleague, Tini Ricciardi, who also writes beer for Denver Post. And you can also find my book at the Tattered Cover or Barnes & Noble or other places like that. And
for those who didn't know, because I don't know if we pitched it, it was Denver Beer, A History of Mile High Brewing. So get out there and buy that one. And you're online at, what's your online handles?
It's Colo Beerman, primarily COLO Beerman, on Twitter and Instagram, and Colorado Beerman on Facebook.
Tristan, let's promote you as well. Where can people find you?
Yeah, we're over at porchdrinking.com, and you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at porchdrinkingco.
Well, thank you both. I appreciate it. Thanks for listening to the Beer Travelers podcast. If you have a suggestion for a town we should visit next, please drop us a line at podcast@allaboutbeer.com. Please give our podcast a review wherever you listen. It really helps folks find out about us. And if you like the episode, tell a friend and post on your socials. Interested in learning more about connecting with an engaged, energetic, and interested audience of curious beer consumers and brewers? We have many different advertising opportunities, including through our podcasts, website, newsletter, and social media channels. For more information, please contact us at podcast@allaboutbeer.com. When you finish exploring all that Tristan and Jonathan suggest, here's my personal favorite spot in Denver. You need to stop by the Brown Palace Hotel's Ship Tavern for a nightcap. The Italian Renaissance-style hotel is a Denver icon, built in the 1800s, and the bar dates to just after Prohibition. The Ship Tavern features a complete mast and crow's nest, beautiful murals, and a collection of sailing ship models that belong to a former owner. Live piano music and sing-alongs some evenings. It's a place to take in an older era of the city, and they even have some great local beer on draft. The Ship Tavern is where I end every trip to Denver. Stop living vicariously through other people's social media posts, and get out and make some memories of your own. Join Pub Culture Beercations for one of our upcoming tours, and start exploring the world one pint at a time with us. Visit pubculturebeercations.com for more information. All About Beer is back, and we're asking for your support to help provide the independent beer media this rich and colorful industry deserves. Visit our website, allaboutbeer.com, where we're frequently posting new content. And please consider throwing us a few bucks at patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We have low-cost memberships for individuals and small and large companies alike. Every dollar goes to help produce new articles and podcasts.